The cabin lights flickered momentarily as turbulence rattled the plane somewhere over the Midwest. Most passengers barely noticed, lost in their screens or conversations or the gentle pull of sleep. But in row 17, seat C, Maya Richardson noticed everything. She noticed because her 9-month-old son, Daniel, had just woken up crying, his face scrunched and red, and the smell that followed told her exactly why. Maya's heart sank. She had planned this so carefully. The diaper change right before boarding. The extra wipes packed in 3 separate bags. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The backup outfit folded neatly in the overhead compartment. But babies don't operate on schedules, and Daniel had other plans. She glanced around the crowded cabin, searching for options. The seatbelt sign glowed amber above her head. They were still climbing, still locked in their seats by invisible rules and visible lights. The bathroom was 4 rows back, its occupied sign lit like a tiny red warning. Maya bit her lip, calculating. Daniel's cries grew louder, more insistent. The woman in the window seat shifted uncomfortably, turning her face toward the oval glass as if the clouds might offer escape from the rising smell. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper just enough to shoot Maya a look that said everything without words. She reached into the diaper bag, wedged beneath the seat in front of her, fingers finding the changing pad by muscle memory. Maya had done this 1,000 times. In parking lots and restaurant bathrooms, and once, memorably, on a park bench in the rain. She could do this quietly, quickly, efficiently. She spread the pad across her lap, positioning Daniel carefully, whispering soothing sounds that only mothers know how to make. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Unsnap the onesie. Unfold the fresh diaper. Prepare the wipes. Daniel's cries softened to whimpers as she worked, his tiny fists grabbing at her fingers. Maya smiled despite everything, despite the stare she could feel burning into her shoulders, despite the anxiety coiling in her chest. This was motherhood. This was love in its most unglamorous form. She had just opened the soiled diaper when a voice cut through the ambient noise of the cabin like a blade through silk. "What do you think you're doing?" Maya looked up. A flight attendant stood in the aisle, arms crossed, face set in an expression somewhere between disgust and fury. Her name tag read Jennifer in neat block letters, silver against navy blue. Everything about her posture screamed authority, from the sharp angles of her shoulders to the way she planted her feet wide, blocking the aisle completely. Maya blinked, confused for a moment, still holding the diaper half-folded. "I'm sorry." Jennifer's voice rose, not quite shouting, but loud enough that conversations 3 rows forward stopped mid-sentence. "You cannot change a diaper here. This is completely unsanitary and unacceptable." Heat flooded Maya's cheeks. Around her, the cabin seemed to shrink, every face turning toward the confrontation like flowers following the sun. Daniel, sensing his mother's distress, began to cry again, his small voice adding to the chaos. "The bathroom is occupied," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to sound reasonable. "The seatbelt sign is on. I can't stand up yet, and he's uncomfortable. I'm using a changing pad. I'm being careful." Jennifer stepped closer, looming over the seat. "I don't care if you're being careful. This is a health violation. You're exposing other passengers to biohazards." She said the word biohazards with such venom that several nearby passengers actually leaned away as if danger might be contagious. Maya felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding together through sleepless nights and lonely days and the constant weight of doing everything alone. "He's a baby," she said quietly. "He's 9 months old. He can't help it." "Then you should have planned better," Jennifer snapped. "You should have changed him before boarding. You should have waited until the seatbelt sign was off. You should have done anything except this." The words landed like stones. Maya looked down at Daniel, his face wet with tears, his diaper half changed, and felt the world tilting sideways. She wanted to argue. She wanted to explain about the timing, about the occupied bathroom, about how motherhood meant making impossible choices in impossible moments. But her throat closed around the words, trapping them inside where they burned. "I need you to stop immediately," Jennifer continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the cabin. "Put that away. Clean up whatever mess you've made. And if you can't follow basic hygiene rules, maybe you shouldn't be traveling with an infant." Silence fell like a curtain. Even the engine noise seemed to fade. Maya sat frozen, one hand still supporting Daniel, the other clutching the diaper that had started this disaster. Tears pressed against her eyes, hot and insistent, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these strangers who were watching her humiliation like it was entertainment. From somewhere behind her, a woman's voice muttered just loud enough to carry. "Some people have no consideration for others." Another voice, male this time, added, "Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting." Maya wanted to disappear. She wanted to fold into herself until there was nothing left but empty space where a person used to be. Instead, she fumbled with the diaper, her hands shaking now, trying to finish what she'd started while Jennifer stood guard like a sentinel of judgment. Daniel screamed, his little body arching in protest at the interruption, at the tension radiating from his mother's touch. Maya whispered apologies into his soft hair, words that dissolved in the chaos. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Just one more minute. Please, baby, just one more minute." Jennifer didn't move. She stood there, arms still crossed, watching every motion with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. Maya could feel the weight of that gaze pressing down on her shoulders, making every action feel clumsy and wrong. She fumbled with the wipes, accidentally dropping one on the floor. She struggled with the fresh diaper, the tabs refusing to stick properly on the first try. Behind Jennifer, other passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. A teenage girl held up her phone, screen glowing, clearly recording. An elderly man shook his head slowly, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Two women in matching tracksuits leaned together, whispering behind their hands. Maya finally managed to fasten the diaper. She pulled Daniel's onesie back down, snapped it closed, and wrapped the soiled diaper in the changing pad with movements that felt mechanical, disconnected from her body. She shoved everything into a plastic bag from her diaper bag, sealed it, and held it in her lap because she had nowhere else to put it. "There," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm done." Jennifer's expression didn't soften. "You need to dispose of that properly. Not in the seat pocket. Not in the overhead bin. When the seatbelt sign turns off, you take that to the bathroom immediately. Do you understand?" Maya nodded. She couldn't trust herself to speak anymore. The tears were too close, threatening to spill over and complete her humiliation. "And let this be a lesson," Jennifer added, her voice carrying that same public announcement quality that made Maya feel like a child being scolded in front of the class. "Airplane etiquette exists for a reason. We all have to share this space. That means showing basic respect and consideration for your fellow passengers." With that, Jennifer turned and walked away, her steps precise and deliberate, leaving behind a wake of stares and whispers. Maya sat very still, holding Daniel against her chest, feeling his heartbeat rapid against her own. The plastic bag crinkled in her lap. The changing pad was still partly unfolded, bright blue against the gray airplane seat. Around her, the cabin slowly returned to its previous rhythm. Conversations resumed, though some people continued to glance her way. The woman in the window seat had her earbuds in now, eyes firmly fixed on the clouds. The man across the aisle had returned to his newspaper, lifting it high enough to create a wall between them. But 4 rows up, in seat 13B, someone had noticed everything. Marcus Chun sat in his usual position, aisle seat, laptop open but untouched. He had been reviewing quarterly reports when the commotion started, numbers and projections that now seemed impossibly distant and unimportant. He had looked up at the first raised voice, watched the entire scene unfold with the kind of attention most people reserve for accidents or emergencies. Marcus had flown this route 100 times, maybe more. He had flown it so often that he knew which flight attendants worked which days, knew that the coffee was always too weak and the pretzels too salty, knew that turbulence usually hit around Des Moines and clear by the time they reached Denver. This was his airline, not just in the abstract sense of preference or loyalty points, but in the literal, legal sense that came with ownership. He had inherited it from his father, who had built it from a single plane and a dream into something that now carried millions of passengers every year. Marcus had grown up in airports, learned to walk in hangars, done his homework in departure lounges. He knew every policy, every procedure, every line of the employee handbook that governed how his staff treated the people who chose to fly with them. And what he had just witnessed violated every principle that handbook was built on. Marcus closed his laptop slowly, his jaw tight. He had a rule about revealing his identity on flights. He preferred to travel anonymously, to see how things really operated when nobody knew the owner was watching. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It gave him insight that no amount of reports or meetings could provide. He had discovered problems this way, yes, but he had also discovered moments of excellence, small kindnesses that deserved recognition. This was not one of those moments. He watched as the young mother, Maya, he had heard Jennifer use the name, sat frozen in her seat, her baby finally quiet but her own face pale and drawn. She looked like she was fighting to breathe normally, fighting to hold herself together in a space that had just become hostile. Marcus recognized that look. He had seen it in his wife's eyes years ago, when she was the one traveling alone with their infant daughter, navigating the impossible logistics of motherhood in motion. The memory sharpened his anger into something cold and precise. Marcus pressed the call button above his head. The light blinked on, a small red summons that usually brought quick attention. He waited. 30 seconds passed. A minute. He pressed it again, holding it longer this time. Around him, other passengers continued their various activities, unaware that the dynamic in the cabin was about to shift. Jennifer appeared from the galley, her expression pleasant and professional as she approached his row. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Marcus looked up at her, his face neutral. "I need to speak with you. Privately." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Is there a problem with your service?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "There is." Something in his tone must have registered because Jennifer's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing uncertainty underneath. She glanced toward the galley, then back at Marcus. "I can address any concerns right here, sir. I'm happy to help." "I don't think you understand," Marcus said quietly. "This conversation needs to happen privately." Now, the cabin had grown quieter again, people sensing fresh tension in the air. Jennifer's hands clasped together in front of her, a gesture that might have looked composed to anyone who didn't notice the white knuckles. "Of course, sir. If you'll follow me to the galley." Marcus stood, unfolding from his seat with the ease of someone who had spent countless hours in airplane rows. He was tall, taller than Jennifer, and he used that height now without aggression, simply standing in a way that made his presence undeniable. He gestured for her to lead the way. They moved through the cabin, passing row after row of passengers. As they walked by Maya's seat, Marcus paused for just a fraction of a second. He caught her eye, saw the exhaustion there, the defeat, and gave her the smallest nod. Not a promise, not yet, but an acknowledgement. She blinked, confused, and he continued walking. The galley was cramped, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The walls were lined with equipment and supplies, everything locked down and secured. Jennifer positioned herself near the coffee maker, arms crossed again in that defensive posture Marcus was beginning to recognize as her default. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked, her voice still professional, but with an edge now, something brittle underneath. Marcus took a breath, choosing his words carefully. He had learned long ago that how you said something mattered as much as what you said. "I witnessed your interaction with the passenger in row 17, the mother with the infant." Jennifer's chin lifted slightly. "That situation was handled according to protocol. Diaper changes in seats are a hygiene violation. I was well within my rights to intervene." "Tell me something," Marcus said, his voice still quiet. "Have you ever traveled alone with a baby?" The question seemed to catch Jennifer off guard. I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me. Jennifer shifted her weight. No, I haven't. Marcus nodded slowly. Then let me paint a picture for you. You're traveling alone with an infant who is completely dependent on you for everything. Comfort, food, cleanliness, safety. You time the diaper change for right before boarding because you know that's best. But babies don't care about your timing. They have needs that arise without warning and without consideration for seatbelt signs or bathroom availability. Jennifer's expression remained firm. That doesn't change hygiene standards. You're right, Marcus agreed. It doesn't. But it does change how we approach the situation. That mother was using a changing pad. She was being as discreet as possible under difficult circumstances. And instead of offering help or understanding, you chose to humiliate her publicly. I did not humiliate anyone, Jennifer said, her voice rising slightly. I enforce policy. You raise your voice, Marcus continued, his tone steady, relentless. You used words like biohazard and disgust in a way that ensured every passenger nearby could hear. You implied that she was a bad mother, that she should have planned better, that she didn't belong in this space. That is not enforcement. That is punishment. Jennifer's face flushed red. With all due respect, sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't have to justify my actions to a passenger. If you have a formal complaint, you can file it through our website when we land. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it between two fingers, not offering it yet, just letting her see it. Actually, he said quietly, you do have to justify your actions. Because I'm not just a passenger. Jennifer's eyes flicked to the card. In the fluorescent light of the galley, she could read it clearly. Marcus Chun, Chief Executive Officer, Skybridge Airlines. Below that, the company logo she wore on her own uniform. The color drained from her face. Mr. Chun, I wasn't aware. Marcus held up his hand, stopping her. That's exactly the point. You weren't aware. You treated that mother the way you did because you thought nobody was watching who mattered. Nobody who could hold you accountable. But here's what you need to understand about this airline, about the company I run. Every passenger matters. Every interaction matters. And the way you treat people when you think nobody's watching tells me everything I need to know about your character. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed. Sir, I apologize. I was just trying to maintain standards. No, Marcus said. You were trying to maintain control. There's a difference. Standards are about safety and service. Control is about power. And what I saw back, there was someone using their position to make another person feel small. That's not what we do here. That's not who we are. The galley felt smaller somehow, the air thick with tension. Jennifer's professional composure had cracked completely now, her hands trembling slightly as they hung at her sides. I've been flying for 8 years, she said, her voice shaking. I've never had a complaint. Maybe that's because most people don't complain, Marcus replied. They just remember how you made them feel. They remember the day they were humiliated on an airplane, and they choose a different airline next time. They tell their friends. They post online. One bad interaction can undo 1,000 good ones. He stepped closer, not threatening, just present. I'm going to ask you to do something now. Something that's going to be uncomfortable. But it's necessary. Jennifer swallowed hard. What is it? You're going to go back to row 17? Marcus said. You're going to apologize to that mother. Sincerely. Not because I'm telling you to, but because it's the right thing to do. And then you're going to offer her whatever assistance she needs for the rest of this flight. Jennifer's jaw clenched. And if I refuse, then you'll be looking for a new job before we land, Marcus said simply. Not as a threat, just as a fact. I have zero tolerance for staff who abuse their authority. I've built this company on the principle that flying should be accessible and dignified for everyone. Parents, children, elderly passengers, people with disabilities. Everyone, and anyone who can uphold that principle doesn't belong wearing this uniform. Silence stretched between them. Beyond the galley, the ambient noise of the plane continued. Engines humming, passengers talking, life going on as if this conversation wasn't happening. But in this small space, everything had changed. Jennifer's eyes were wet now, though she was clearly fighting tears. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. I'll apologize. Good, Marcus said. He handed her the business card. And, Jennifer, when we land, I want you to come see me. We're going to have a longer conversation about empathy and service standards. But for now, let's focus on making this right. Jennifer took the card with shaking fingers. She stared at it for a moment, then looked up at Marcus. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I really did think I was doing the right thing. I believe you, Marcus replied. And that's what makes this a learning opportunity instead of a termination. We all have blind spots. The question is what we do when they're pointed out to us. He stepped aside, giving her room to leave the galley. Jennifer hesitated for just a moment, then moved past him, back into the cabin. Marcus watched her go, then stayed behind, giving her space to do what needed to be done without him hovering. He pulled out his phone and opened an app that gave him direct access to the airline's operations. A few taps brought up the passenger manifest for this flight. Row 17, Seat C, Maya Richardson. Single ticket, lap infant noted. He made a note in the system, flagging her profile for follow-up service recovery. Then he did something else. He accessed the flight crew files and pulled up Jennifer's record. 8 years of service, as she'd said. Performance reviews mostly positive, with a few notes about being strict with protocols. No formal complaints on file, but as Marcus had told her, most people didn't complain officially. They just left. He would deal with Jennifer's situation properly when they landed. Training, probably. Counseling, definitely. Whether she kept her job would depend on how seriously she took this wake-up call. But that was future work. Right now, there was a mother in row 17 who needed to know that not everyone on this plane saw her as a problem to be solved. Marcus closed the apps and pocketed his phone. He took a deep breath, centering himself the way he'd learned in the leadership training he'd taken years ago. Confrontation never got easier, no matter how necessary. But what came next would be different. What came next would be about repair. He stepped out of the galley and walked back toward his seat. As he passed row 17, he glanced over. Jennifer was there, standing in the aisle, her posture completely different now. Shoulders rounded instead of squared, head slightly bowed. And she was talking, words too quiet for Marcus to hear from where he stood. But Maya's face was visible. Surprise, confusion, and then, slowly, something that might have been relief. Marcus continued to his seat and sat down. He didn't open his laptop, didn't check his phone, just sat there, looking out the window at the clouds below, thinking about his own daughter, now 14, and navigating the turbulence of high school. He remembered the days when she was Daniel's age, when his wife was the one dealing with impossible logistics and judgment from strangers. He remembered feeling helpless, being away on business trips while she managed everything alone. That was part of why he'd changed the company policies 5 years ago. Family-friendly seating. Bassinets available on long-haul flights. Priority boarding for passengers with small children. Special changing areas in the airport lounges his airline operated. Small things that made a big difference for people trying to navigate the world with tiny humans in tow. But policies meant nothing if the people implementing them didn't understand the why behind them. Jennifer was a perfect example. She knew the rules. She followed the procedures. But she'd lost sight of the fundamental purpose, which was to serve passengers, not to police them. The seatbelt sign dinged off, the sound cutting through Marcus's thoughts. Around the cabin, passengers began moving, stretching, heading to the bathrooms. Marcus glanced back toward row 17 again. Maya was standing now, Daniel in her arms, the plastic bag with the soiled diaper clutched in her other hand. She was heading toward the bathroom, her movements careful and deliberate. Jennifer was no longer hovering. She had retreated to the galley, probably processing what had just happened, probably terrified about what awaited her when the plane landed. Marcus felt a small pang of sympathy. He didn't enjoy being harsh with his employees. But sometimes kindness meant holding people accountable, forcing them to confront their own behavior. A flight attendant Marcus didn't recognize appeared at his elbow, a different woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mr. Chun," she said quietly, "I didn't realize you were on this flight. Is there anything I can get you?" Marcus looked up at her name tag. Patricia. He remembered approving her 20-year service award last month. "Just some water, please, Patricia. And maybe you could keep an eye on the passenger in 17C. Make sure she has everything she needs." Patricia's expression shifted, understanding blooming there. "Of course, sir. Absolutely." She disappeared and returned moments later with a bottle of water and a knowing nod. Marcus thanked her and settled back into his seat. Outside, the landscape had changed. They were over the Rockies now, mountains rising like ancient gods beneath them. The turbulence had smoothed out, the flight leveling into that peaceful cruise where time seemed to exist differently. Maya returned from the bathroom, Daniel calm now, his head resting on her shoulder. As she passed Marcus's row, their eyes met again. This time, he saw something different in her expression. Not gratitude yet, she didn't know what he'd done, but a kind of cautious hope. Like maybe this flight wouldn't be the nightmare it had started to become. She settled back in her seat, adjusting Daniel in her lap, pulling a small cloth book from her bag to entertain him. From where Marcus sat, he could see her shoulders starting to relax, the tension bleeding out degree by degree. Patricia appeared at Maya's row, bending down to speak quietly. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he saw Patricia gesture toward the empty seat next to Maya, saw her pull out a small blanket and pillow from somewhere. Saw Maya's face transform from confusion to something close to tears as Patricia apparently offered her extra space, extra comfort, extra dignity. That was what Marcus had built this airline to be. Not perfect because nothing involving humans ever was, but responsive, caring, willing to acknowledge when something went wrong and to make it right. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his assistant, something about a meeting tomorrow that needed rescheduling. Marcus ignored it. For now, for these next few hours, he wasn't the CEO making decisions about routes and pricing and fleet management. He was just another passenger, watching from a few rows away as a mother got the treatment she deserved from the beginning. The plane flew on, carrying all of them toward whatever awaited at the destination. But the cabin felt different now. The air lighter, as if justice, even in small doses, changed the molecular structure of the space around it. Maya didn't know that the man 4 rows up was the reason Jennifer had apologized. She didn't know that her humiliation had been witnessed by the one person on the plane who could actually change the system that had allowed it to happen. She just knew that something had shifted, that the flight attendant who had been so cruel was now gone, replaced by Patricia, who kept checking on her with genuine concern, who brought her extra snacks and a warm towel, and even offered to hold Daniel for a moment while Maya dug through her bag. In the grand scheme of things, it was small. One flight among thousands that day. One interaction among millions that happened in the skies above America. But for Maya Richardson, sitting in row 17 with her son asleep against her chest again, it was everything. It was the difference between arriving at her destination defeated or arriving whole. And for Marcus Chun, sitting 4 rows forward with his laptop still closed and his water barely touched, it was a reminder of why he did this work. Why he fought board members who wanted to cut costs at the expense of service. Why he reviewed customer complaint summaries every week, reading stories that would make anyone with empathy wince. Why he occasionally flew coach or business class instead of first, observing how his company actually treated people when they thought nobody was watching. Because moments like this mattered. Because how you treated people when they were vulnerable said everything about your character. Because flying was already stressful enough without adding cruelty to the mix. The Rocky Mountains gave way to desert, rust-colored earth stretching endlessly below. Marcus finally opened his laptop, returned to those quarterly reports that had seemed so important before this flight took off. But the numbers felt different now, connected to something larger than profit margins. Each passenger represented someone's story, someone's joy or grief or frustration or hope. Maya Richardson was just one name on a manifest of 200. But she was also a mother doing her best with limited resources and no support system visible on this plane. She was someone who had started this day planning every detail to avoid exactly what had happened. She was tired and alone and trying so hard. And now, at least for the rest of this flight, she wouldn't have to try alone. Patricia stopped by Maya's row again, this time with a small bag of crackers and cheese. Daniel, awake again, reached for them with grabby hands, and Patricia laughed, her whole face crinkling with genuine delight. "What a sweetheart," she said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. How old is he? 9 months, Maya answered, and Marcus could hear the exhaustion in her voice even from rows away. Oh, that's such a fun age, Patricia replied. My grandson just turned 1. They're into everything at this stage, aren't they? A simple conversation. Human connection. The exact opposite of how Jennifer had approached the situation. Marcus made another note in his phone, this one about Patricia. Commendation for excellent service recovery. Bonus in next paycheck. Small gestures mattered. Recognition mattered. If he wanted his staff to treat passengers with dignity, he needed to treat his staff the same way. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Folks, we're starting our initial descent into Denver. Should have you on the ground in about 30 minutes. Weather's looking good. Temperature is a pleasant 72 degrees. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. All around, the familiar pre-landing ballet began. Tray tables up, seats in upright positions, electronic devices stowed or switched to airplane mode. Maya gathered her scattered belongings with practiced efficiency, one hand keeping Daniel secure, while the other stuffed books and toys and the seemingly endless supplies that came with traveling with an infant back into the diaper bag. Marcus closed his laptop and stowed it in the seat pocket. He'd deal with those reports from the office. Right now, he was focused on landing, on getting to the gate, on having the conversation he needed to have with Jennifer before she left the aircraft. The plane descended through layers of clouds, the mountains rising to meet them. Denver appeared below, sprawling and sunbright, the airport visible as they made their approach. The landing was smooth, barely a bump as the wheels touched tarmac. Applause broke out, as it sometimes did, passengers relieved or grateful or just following tradition. Marcus didn't clap. He was already thinking ahead, planning his next moves. As they taxied to the gate, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to airport operations. Need to speak with flight attendant Jennifer Morris before she deplanes. Please ask her to wait at the gate. The response came immediately. Confirmed. The plane shuddered to a stop. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began standing, reaching for overhead bins, gathering their lives back together after hours of suspension. Marcus stayed seated, watching as Maya struggled with her bags and baby, juggling everything with the desperate grace of mothers everywhere. Patricia appeared again, reaching for Daniel without asking, simply taking the baby so Maya could grab her things. Maya's face showed surprise, then gratitude, then something that might have been the beginning of tears. Thank you, she mouthed. Of course, sweetheart, Patricia said. That's what we're here for. Marcus finally stood, pulling his single carry-on from the overhead bin. He had packed light, as always, a skill learned from years of constant travel. He stepped into the aisle and joined the slow migration toward the exit. As he approached row 17, he paused. Maya had Daniel back now, was settling him into a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked up, saw Marcus standing there, and something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, though of what she couldn't say. Safe travels, Marcus said simply. You too, Maya replied. And then, hesitantly, thank you. He nodded once and continued forward, through the jet bridge, into the controlled chaos of the airport. But he didn't head toward baggage claim or ground transportation. Instead, he found a quiet corner near the gate and waited. Jennifer emerged 10 minutes later, after the rest of the passengers had deplaned, after the cleaning crew had begun their work. She looked small without the cabin around her, vulnerable in her crisp uniform. Her eyes found Marcus immediately, and she walked over with steps that looked like they required physical courage. Mr. Chun, she said, I'm ready to talk. Good, Marcus replied. Let's find somewhere more private. They walked through the terminal, past shops and restaurants, and streams of travelers rushing toward their own destinations. Marcus led her to the airline's crew lounge, a space designed for flight staff between shifts. At this hour, it was mostly empty, just a few pilots reviewing paperwork in the corner. Marcus gestured to a table near the window, away from the others. They sat, and for a moment, neither spoke. Outside, planes taxied and took off and landed, the endless rhythm of an airport. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Tell me what you learned today. Jennifer looked down at her hands, folded on the table. I learned that I let my frustration about protocol override my compassion for a passenger who was struggling. Keep going, Marcus prompted. I learned that how we treat people matters more than whether we follow every rule perfectly. And I learned that I have blind spots I didn't even know existed. Marcus nodded. That's a good start. Now tell me why you reacted the way you did. Not the policy reasons, the real reasons. Jennifer's face tightened. She was quiet for a long time, working through something internal. Finally, she said, I think I was angry. Not at her specifically, but at parents who don't seem to consider how their choices affect everyone around them. I've cleaned up so many messes, dealt with so many situations where kids are running wild and parents just ignore it. I think I've built up resentment over the years, and today it all came out at someone who didn't deserve it. That's honest, Marcus said. And awareness is the first step toward change. But here's what you need to understand. That resentment, it's poison, not just for your passengers, but for you. If you carry that into every interaction, you'll burn out. You'll become bitter, and this job will eat you alive. I know, Jennifer whispered. I can feel it happening. So the question is, Marcus continued, do you want to stay in this career? Because if you do, something has to change. You need to find ways to reconnect with why you started flying in the first place. You need to build empathy instead of walls. And you need to recognize that every passenger boarding your plane is dealing with things you can't see. Jennifer nodded, tears finally spilling over. I want to stay. I love flying. I love this airline. I just lost my way somewhere. Then here's what's going to happen, Marcus said. You're going to take a week off. Paid. Use that time to think about whether this is really what you want. If you decide it is, you're going to complete a service recovery training program I'm going to design specifically for situations like this. You're going to have monthly check-ins with a supervisor who will help you process the emotional labor of this job. And you're going to apologize to Maya Richardson in a more formal way, in writing, through her customer service department. Jennifer wiped her eyes. Okay, yes, I'll do all of that. And if I ever hear about you treating another passenger the way you treated her today, Marcus added, his voice gentle but firm, you're done. No second chances. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Jennifer said. Marcus stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Get some rest. Think about what you really want. And remember that every passenger is someone's daughter, mother, friend. They all deserve dignity. Jennifer stood too, squaring her shoulders in a visible effort to compose herself. Thank you, Mr. Chun, for not just firing me. Thank you for being willing to learn, Marcus replied. He watched her leave the lounge, her steps steadier now than when she'd arrived. Then he pulled out his phone and called his assistant. I need you to set up a formal service recovery for a passenger, he said when she answered. Maya Richardson. She flew with us today from Chicago to Denver. I want her contacted within 24 hours with an apology, a full refund, and a voucher for future travel. First class. Consider it done, his assistant replied, already typing. Anything else? Yes, Marcus said, looking out at the planes moving across the tarmac. I want to task a team with reviewing all our family travel policies. I think we need to do better. Schedule a meeting for next week. I'll put it on your calendar. Maya stood at the baggage carousel, Daniel strapped to her chest in the carrier, watching suitcases circle endlessly like a strange mechanical river. Her mind kept replaying the flight, trying to make sense of what had happened. The humiliation that had burned through her chest when Jennifer stood over her, voice sharp and condemning. Then the unexpected apology that came later, stilted and uncomfortable but seemingly genuine. And that man, the tall one with the calm presence who had looked at her with something like understanding. She didn't know what to make of any of it. Flying had always been stressful for her, even before Daniel was born. There was something about being trapped in a metal tube thousands of feet above the ground that made her acutely aware of how little control she had over anything. Add a baby to that equation, and the anxiety multiplied exponentially. Every cry felt amplified. Every stare from other passengers felt like judgment. Every small disaster, like a diaper situation, felt like proof that she was failing at this whole motherhood thing. Her blue suitcase finally appeared, bumping along the conveyor belt. Maya grabbed it with her free hand, the weight of it making her shoulder ache. Everything hurt these days. Her back from carrying Daniel. Her arms from the constant lifting and holding. Her heart from the loneliness that had become her constant companion since Daniel's father had walked out 6 months ago, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. Ready, as if anyone was ever truly ready for the reality of caring for another human life. Maya certainly hadn't been, but Daniel existed, and that meant she had to figure it out, ready or not. She wheeled her suitcase toward the exit, joining the stream of travelers flowing through the automatic doors into the bright Colorado afternoon. The air hit her differently here, thinner and crisper than Chicago's heavy humidity. She took a deep breath, feeling it expand her lungs in an unfamiliar way. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She managed to extract it without disturbing Daniel, who had fallen asleep again against her chest. A text from her sister Jenna. "Did you land? How was the flight?" Maya stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to answer. Fine didn't capture it. Horrible didn't either. Complicated seemed closest to the truth, but that would require explanation, and she didn't have the energy for that conversation yet. She typed back, "Landed safe. Getting rental car now. See you in an hour." The rental car process took longer than expected because everything with Daniel took longer than expected. By the time Maya had the car seat installed and her luggage loaded and Daniel transferred without waking him, another 40 minutes had evaporated. She programmed her sister's address into the GPS and pulled out of the airport, merging into traffic that moved faster than she was comfortable with. Denver sprawled around her, all wide streets and mountain views, and that particular western spaciousness that made Chicago feel claustrophobic in retrospect. Maya had never been here before. This trip was supposed to be about supporting Jenna, who was going through a divorce and needed family around her. But it was also, if Maya was honest with herself, an escape. A chance to be somewhere that didn't remind her of all the ways her life had deviated from the plan she'd once had. She'd met Daniel's father, Ryan, in nursing school. He'd seemed stable then, ambitious, talking about opening a practice together someday. They'd gotten pregnant accidentally, but Maya had been optimistic. They'd make it work. Lots of people made it work. But Ryan's version of making it work involved increasingly long absences, vague excuses about needing space, and finally a confession that he'd been seeing someone else, someone without the complications of impending parenthood. Maya had delivered Daniel alone, her mother on one side and Jenna on the other, while Ryan was presumably with his new girlfriend doing whatever people did when they abandoned their responsibilities. The anger had faded over the months, replaced by a duller ache that felt more like grief. Not for Ryan specifically, but for the future she'd imagined. The co-parenting and shared responsibilities, and someone to hand the baby to when exhaustion became unbearable. Instead, she had this. Solo navigation through a world that seemed designed for pairs. Car seats that required engineering degrees to install. Diaper bags that weighed more than small children. Airplanes where changing a baby could spark public condemnation. The GPS directed her off the highway onto residential streets lined with trees just beginning to show fall colors. Jenna's house appeared on the right, a modest ranch with a yard that needed mowing and a driveway that needed resurfacing. Maya pulled in and killed the engine, sitting for a moment in the sudden silence. Daniel stirred, making small sounds that signaled his approach to wakefulness. Maya unbuckled him from the car's seat, gathering him against her shoulder before he could fully wake and start crying. She left the luggage for now and walked to the front door, which opened before she could knock. Jenna stood there, looking thinner than Maya remembered, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an old college shirt. But her smile was real, reaching her eyes in a way that made Maya's throat tighten. "You made it," Jenna said, pulling Maya into a careful hug that accommodated Daniel between them. "How was the flight?" Maya stepped inside, the question hanging between them. The house smelled like coffee and something baking, comforting scents that made the tension in Maya's shoulders ease slightly. "It was complicated," she said finally. Jenna closed the door and gestured toward the living room, where toys were scattered across the floor despite her kids being at their dad's house this week. "Sit. Tell me everything." So Maya did. She settled onto the couch, positioning Daniel in her lap where he could grab at her fingers and investigate the world with intense baby focus. And she told Jenna about Jennifer's harsh words, about the stares from other passengers, about the humiliation that had made her want to disappear into the airplane floor. She told her about the unexpected apology, about the older flight attendant named Patricia who had been so kind afterward. And she told her about the man who had looked at her with understanding, though she didn't know why he stuck in her memory when so many other passengers had looked away. Jenna listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from anger to sympathy to something protective and fierce. "That's awful," she said when Maya finished. "You should file a complaint. That flight attendant had no right to treat you that way." Maya shrugged, suddenly tired. "What would be the point? It's over. I just want to forget about it." But Jenna was already reaching for her phone, fingers moving across the screen. "I'm serious, Maya. Airlines need to know when their staff treats passengers like garbage. Otherwise, nothing changes." "Jenna, please," Maya said. "I don't have the energy for a fight right now. I just want to be here with you and help with whatever you need." Jenna paused, thumb hovering over her screen. Then she set the phone down and nodded. "Okay, we'll talk about it later. But I'm not letting this go completely." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the kind of comfortable domesticity that Maya hadn't experienced in months. Jenna made sandwiches while Maya fed Daniel his pureed carrots, which he consumed with enthusiastic messiness. They talked about Jenna's divorce, about her ex-husband's new apartment, and the custody arrangement that felt simultaneously too rigid and too flexible. They talked about their mother, who called too often with advice neither of them had requested. They talked about everything except the flight, letting that experience fade into the background. By evening, Maya felt more like herself. Daniel had been bathed and fed and was now sleeping in the portable crib Jenna had set up in the guest room. The two sisters sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the sky turn orange and purple as the sun set behind the mountains. "I'm glad you're here," Jenna said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy to make the trip with Daniel. I needed to get away," Maya admitted. "Everything in Chicago just reminds me of how different my life is from what I thought it would be." Jenna reached over and squeezed her hand. "Different doesn't mean worse. Tell that to the people on the airplane who looked at me like I was contaminating their space," Maya said, the bitterness surprising her with its intensity. Jenna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I looked up that airline while you were giving Daniel his bath. Skybridge Airlines. They've actually won awards for customer service. What happened to you seems really out of character for them." Maya took a sip of wine, feeling it warm her chest. "Maybe I just got unlucky. Wrong flight attendant on a bad day. Or maybe," Jenna said carefully, "it's part of a bigger pattern that nobody talks about. How mothers are treated in public spaces. Like we're supposed to apologize for existing, for having needs, for our children having needs." Maya thought about that. She thought about all the times she'd felt that pressure to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, to manage Daniel's needs so quietly and efficiently that no one would notice they were there. The mental load of anticipating every possible problem and preparing for it, only to have the universe throw something unpredictable anyway, like a baby who needed changing at exactly the wrong moment. "You're right," she said finally, "and I hate that you're right." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the mountains becoming black silhouettes against a sky scattered with more stars than Maya ever saw in Chicago. Inside, Daniel slept peacefully, unaware of his mother's swirling thoughts or his aunt's protective anger, unaware that halfway across the city, in an airline office building, decisions were being made that would change the trajectory of their story. Marcus had gone directly from the airport to Skybridge's regional headquarters, a glass and steel building near downtown Denver. His office occupied the top floor, with windows that offered panoramic views of the city and the mountains beyond. Normally, he found those views centering a reminder of how small individual problems were against the backdrop of geological time. But tonight, the mountains felt distant and irrelevant. He'd been reviewing Jennifer's file for the past hour, along with the files of every other flight attendant who'd received complaints in the past year. Patterns emerged when you looked closely enough. Not overt discrimination, nothing that would trigger legal action, but a subtle thread of bias woven through certain interactions. Parents with young children, elderly passengers, people whose English wasn't perfect, anyone who deviated from the idealized image of a business traveler moving efficiently through space. His assistant, Rebecca, knocked on the open door. The service recovery team confirmed contact with Maya Richardson. They've sent the apology email and the compensation package. She hasn't responded yet. It's been less than 3 hours, Marcus said, not looking up from the files spread across his desk. Give her time to process. Rebecca stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Can I speak candidly? Always, Marcus replied, finally meeting her gaze. Rebecca had been with him for 5 years, had earned the right to honest conversation through countless late nights and crisis management sessions. I think you're taking this very personally, she said, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I'm worried you're setting an impossible standard. We employ thousands of flight attendants across dozens of cities. You can't personally intervene every time someone has a bad day. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of her words. You're not wrong, but this wasn't just a bad day. This was a systematic failure of empathy. And if it happened on one of my planes, I have to ask why. When our training, our policies, our culture allowed it to happen. Rebecca sat in the chair across from him. So what's your plan? System-wide retraining? New protocols? Both, probably, Marcus said. But first I need to understand the scope of the problem. I've asked HR to pull data on customer complaints related to family travel over the past 2 years. I want to see if this is isolated or indicative of something bigger. And Jennifer? She gets her week off to think. Then retraining if she wants to keep her job. But I'm also creating a mandatory empathy workshop for all customer-facing staff. Not just flight attendants. Gate agents, customer service, everyone. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's going to be expensive. More expensive than losing passengers because they feel unwelcome on our planes? Marcus countered. More expensive than viral videos showing our staff treating people cruelly? Point taken, Rebecca said. I'll coordinate with HR and training departments to start developing curriculum. After she left, Marcus turned to his computer and pulled up Maya Richardson's file again. The system showed her home address in Chicago, her contact information, her flight history with Skybridge. She'd flown with them 6 times in the past 2 years, always economy, never any issues noted. A reliable customer who probably never expected to be treated the way Jennifer had treated her. He opened a new email, addressing it directly to Maya. Then he paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could he possibly say that the formal apology hadn't already covered? Sorry we humiliated you felt inadequate. We'll do better next time felt like empty corporate speak. Finally, he typed, Ms. Richardson, I was a passenger on your flight today from Chicago to Denver. I witnessed the interaction with our flight attendant, and I want you to know that the treatment you received does not reflect the values of Skybridge Airlines. As the owner of this company, I take full responsibility for what happened. We have already begun implementing changes to ensure no other passenger experiences what you did. If you're willing, I would like to speak with you personally to hear your perspective on how we can improve. My direct number is below. Regardless of whether you choose to contact me, please know that your dignity matters, and I'm deeply sorry it was compromised on one of my planes. He read it over 3 times, deleted it twice, then finally hit send before he could second-guess himself again. The email disappeared into the digital void. Maya might never respond. She had every right to ignore him, to write off the entire airline as irredeemable, to tell everyone she knew to fly with competitors. But he had to try, because if he'd learned anything from building this company, it was that people remembered how you made them feel more than they remembered your on-time arrival statistics or your luggage handling scores. And what Maya would remember, without intervention, was shame. His phone rang, the internal line from security. Mr. Chun, we have a situation developing online. You should see this. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What kind of situation? The guard's voice was carefully neutral. A video from today's flight. It's spreading rapidly on social media. Marcus pulled up Twitter on his computer, typing Skybridge Airlines into the search bar. The results loaded, and his jaw clenched. The top tweet, already at 40,000 retweets, showed shaky phone footage of Jennifer standing over Maya's seat, her voice carrying clearly through someone's recording. "You cannot change a diaper here. This is completely unsanitary and unacceptable." The caption read, "Flight attendant publicly shames young mother for changing baby's diaper. This is how Skybridge Airlines treats parents." The thread below was exactly what Marcus had feared. Outrage, calls for boycotts, personal stories from other parents who'd experienced similar treatment on various airlines, and questions. Lots of questions about what Skybridge would do about it. He picked up his phone and called Rebecca back. "We have a PR crisis developing. The incident was recorded and it's going viral." Rebecca's sigh was audible. "Of course it was. What do you want to do?" "Full transparency," Marcus said immediately. "No corporate doublespeak. No hiding behind policy. We acknowledge what happened, we explain what we're doing about it, and we commit to doing better." "You want to issue a statement tonight?" "I want to issue it within the hour," Marcus said. "I don't want my name on it. Not the PR department's boilerplate. Mine." "That's risky," Rebecca warned. "It makes you personally accountable." "Good," Marcus replied. "I should be accountable. It's my airline." He spent the next 45 minutes crafting a statement, running it past legal to make sure he wasn't creating liability issues, then posting it simultaneously on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. "Today, one of our passengers was treated in a manner completely contrary to our values. A mother traveling with her infant was publicly reprimanded for managing a difficult situation as best she could. As the owner of Skybridge Airlines, I take full responsibility for this failure. We have already begun implementing comprehensive training for all staff on empathy, family travel needs, and treating every passenger with dignity. The flight attendant involved is undergoing additional coaching. But more importantly, we are examining our entire culture to understand how this happened and ensure it never happens again. To the mother involved, I offer my personal apology. To all parents who fly with us, we can and will do better." Marcus Chun, CEO, Skybridge Airlines. He hit post and watched the statement go live across all platforms. The response was immediate. Some people praised the transparency. Others remained skeptical, pointing out that apologies without action were meaningless. A few called for Jennifer to be fired, while others argued for more understanding of the pressures flight attendants faced. But underneath all the noise, Marcus noticed a shift. The conversation was moving from pure outrage towards something more constructive. People were sharing their own stories, yes, but also suggestions for what airlines could do differently. Designated changing areas, more flexible policies, better training on recognizing when rules needed to bend for human realities. His phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Chun, this is Maya Richardson. I received your email and saw your statement online. I don't know what to say. Thank you for taking this seriously. I didn't expect anyone to care." Marcus read the message twice, feeling something loosen in his chest. He typed back, "You deserved better from the start. Would you be willing to talk tomorrow? I'd like to hear your suggestions on how we can improve." The response came quickly. "Yes, I'm in Denver visiting family. I can meet you somewhere." They arranged a time and place, a coffee shop near Jenna's house that Maya suggested. After confirming the details, Marcus set his phone down and looked out at the city lights spreading below his office windows. Somewhere out there, Maya Richardson was probably putting her son to bed, processing a day that had started with humiliation and ended with unexpected attention. He hoped she was okay. He hoped this wouldn't just be another story that went viral and faded, replaced by the next outrage. He hoped that by this time next year, Skybridge Airlines would be known not for that video of Jennifer's harsh words, but for how they'd responded, how they'd changed, how they'd proven that corporations could still choose humanity over policy. But hope wasn't enough. Hope without action was just another form of abandonment. So Marcus opened a new document and began outlining the family-friendly initiative he'd been considering for months, but kept delaying. Priority boarding for families. Dedicated changing stations on all aircraft. Training modules on unconscious bias. Partnership with parenting organizations to get real feedback on what would actually help. He worked until midnight, building a framework that would require board approval and significant investment, but felt non-negotiable now. When he finally left the office, the building was dark except for security lights and the cleaning crew moving through the floors below. The drive home took him past the airport, where planes continued their endless cycle of departures and arrivals. Marcus thought about all the lives intersecting in that space, all the stories unfolding at 30,000 feet. Some joyful, some desperate, most somewhere in between. Every single person carrying their own complicated reality, trying to get from one place to another with whatever dignity they could maintain. He built an airline to facilitate those journeys. But facilitating wasn't enough anymore. He needed to protect them, honor them, make sure that when people flew Skybridge, they felt like they mattered. Tomorrow, he would start with Maya. He would listen to her story, really listen, not just wait for his turn to talk. He would ask what would have made the difference in that moment when Jennifer stood over her with judgment instead of help. He would take notes and implement changes and follow up to make sure those changes actually worked. But tonight, he just drove home to the empty house that reminded him of his own failures, his own absences. His daughter was at her grandmother's place, probably already asleep. His wife had been gone for 3 years now. Cancer taking her before she got to see their daughter graduate middle school, or learn to drive, or any of the 1,000 small moments that made up a life. He'd thrown himself into work after the funeral, building the airline into something his wife would have been proud of. But lately, Marcus had begun to wonder if he'd built it right. If the values he claimed to uphold actually showed up in the daily interactions between his staff and the flying public. Today had revealed the gap between aspiration and reality. Tomorrow, he would start closing it, one conversation at a time, one policy change at a time, one training session at a time. Because if he'd learned anything from loss, it was that you didn't get unlimited chances to do the right thing. You got moments, brief and precious, where you could choose decency over convenience, where you could stand up instead of looking away, where you could use whatever power you held to make someone else's journey a little bit easier. Maya Richardson had deserved that from the beginning. But at least now, finally, she was going to get it. The coffee shop Maya had chosen was tucked into a neighborhood strip mall, the kind of place that served actual food alongside their lattes and had mismatched furniture that suggested comfort over aesthetics. She arrived 15 minutes early, Daniel strapped to her chest in the carrier, and ordered a decaf coffee she didn't particularly want but felt obligated to purchase for taking up table space. She'd barely slept. After seeing Marcus Chin's public statement online, after reading the hundreds of comments from other parents sharing their own stories of being made to feel unwelcome on planes, trains, in restaurants, in every public space that seemed designed for people without children, Maya had lain awake processing what it meant that someone with actual power had witnessed her humiliation and decided to do something about it. Jenna had stayed up with her, both of them scrolling through the responses to the viral video. Some comments were supportive, angry on Maya's behalf. Others were surprisingly cruel, suggesting she should have stayed home if she couldn't control her child, as if a baby needing a diaper change constituted lack of control. But the overwhelming majority fell somewhere in the middle, people acknowledging the difficulty of the situation while debating where the line should be drawn between individual needs and collective comfort. What struck Maya most was how many of the supportive comments came from people who weren't parents themselves. Childless passengers who wrote about witnessing similar incidents and feeling uncomfortable with how families were treated. Flight attendants from other airlines who admitted the culture often encouraged viewing parents as problems rather than people. Even a few pilots had weighed in, talking about the pressure to maintain schedules and how that pressure trickled down into staff interactions with passengers who slowed things down. The door chimed, pulling Maya from her thoughts. Marcus Chin walked in, and she recognized him immediately even though she'd only seen him briefly on the plane. He was dressed casually today, jeans and a button-down shirt, but he still carried that presence she remembered, the sense of someone accustomed to being listened to. Their eyes met across the coffee shop. Marcus raised a hand in a small wave and headed to the counter to order before joining her. Maya used those few minutes to steady her breathing, to remind herself that she had every right to be here, that her perspective mattered, that she wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. Marcus approached her table, carrying a simple black coffee. "May I sit?" "Please," Maya said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Daniel had fallen asleep against her chest, his small body warm and heavy in a way that always made her feel simultaneously protective and trapped. Marcus sat, setting his coffee down carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know yesterday was difficult, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to hear directly from you about what happened and what we could do better." Maya had prepared a speech in her head, points she wanted to make about policy and training and the assumptions people made about mothers in public spaces. But sitting across from this man who'd gone out of his way to address what happened, the prepared words felt inadequate. "I've been thinking about why it hurts so much," she said instead, surprising herself. "It wasn't just that Jennifer was rude or that she made me feel small. It was that nobody else said anything. All those people watching, and not one person spoke up until you did. That's what really got to me. The silence." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that too. About why it took me as long as it did to intervene. About what makes people look away when they see something wrong happening." "What did you conclude?" Maya asked. Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I think most people assume someone else will handle it. Or they convince themselves it's not their business. Or they're just grateful it's not happening to them. But the result is the same. The person being treated poorly ends up feeling invisible, like their dignity doesn't matter enough for anyone to defend it." Maya felt her throat tighten. That's exactly what it felt like. Invisible. Daniel stirred, making small grunting sounds that suggested he'd wake soon. Maya automatically began the gentle swaying motion that sometimes kept him asleep a bit longer. Marcus watched this with an expression that seemed understanding rather than impatient. "I have a daughter," Marcus said quietly. "She's 14 now, but I remember when she was Daniel's age. My wife and I, before she passed, we used to divide and conquer when we flew. One of us would walk the aisle with her while the other managed the bags and paperwork. But even with two of us, it was hard. I can't imagine doing it alone." "His father left when I was 6 months pregnant," Maya said, the words coming out before she could consider whether she wanted to share that information. "He said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. As if I was." Marcus met her eyes. "You seem to be managing the responsibility remarkably well, given the circumstances." "Do I?" Maya heard the bitterness in her own voice. "Because yesterday, I felt like I was failing at everything. Failing to anticipate Daniel's needs. Failing to avoid conflict. Failing to stand up for myself when someone treated me like I was contaminating their precious airplane." "You weren't failing," Marcus said firmly. "You were trying to care for your child in a challenging environment with limited options. The failure was ours, the airlines, for creating a situation where you felt you had to choose between your son's comfort and avoiding public humiliation." Maya looked down at Daniel's sleeping face, his features so peaceful in sleep, so unaware of the complications his existence created for her navigation of the world. "Where you actually go to change?" she asked, looking back up at Marcus. "Not just policies on paper, but real changes that would make a difference for parents like me." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. "Do you mind if I take notes while you talk? I want to make sure I capture everything accurately." Maya nodded, oddly touched by the gesture. She began talking, and once she started, the words poured out. She talked about how most airplane bathrooms were too small to change a baby safely, how the changing tables when they existed were flimsy and poorly positioned, how there was nowhere to dispose of soiled diapers properly. She talked about the anxiety of not knowing if the seatbelt sign would stay on for 5 minutes or 50, about the impossibility of timing a baby's needs around arbitrary rules. She talked about how gate agents often made families board last, meaning overhead bin space was gone and there was nowhere to store the supplies parents needed accessible during flight. About how family boarding policies existed but were inconsistently enforced, leaving parents to advocate for themselves while juggling children and luggage. About how the entire flying experience seemed designed around the assumption that passengers were solo business travelers who needed nothing beyond a seat and maybe a drink. Marcus listened without interrupting, his fingers moving across his phone screen as he typed notes. When Maya finally ran out of words, he looked up with an expression that seemed both determined and slightly overwhelmed. "That's incredibly helpful," he said. "Most of what you've described are things we can address immediately. Better changing facilities, clearer policies on family boarding, training staff to offer assistance rather than judgment. Some of it will take longer, like redesigning aircraft interiors, but we can start planning those changes now." "What about Jennifer?" Maya asked. "The flight attendant. What happens to her?" Marcus set his phone down. "She's on leave while we develop a comprehensive retraining program. If she completes it successfully and demonstrates genuine understanding of why her behavior was problematic, she can return to work. If not, she'll need to find employment elsewhere." Maya considered this. Part of her wanted Jennifer fired immediately, wanted that swift justice that would feel satisfying in the moment. But another part, the part that understood how exhaustion and frustration could make people act in ways they'd later regret, recognized that permanent consequences for a single incident, however hurtful, might be excessive. "I don't want her to lose everything," Maya said slowly. "But I also don't want another mother to go through what I did because nobody bothered to teach her why it was wrong." "That's fair," Marcus replied. "And it's more compassionate than she probably deserves, given how she treated you." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the coffee shop buzzed with activity. A barista called out drink orders. A group of college students laughed over shared laptops. An elderly couple read separate sections of a newspaper, occasionally sharing interesting bits with each other. Normal life, continuing oblivious to this conversation that felt momentous to Maya. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said suddenly. "Why do you care this much? You could have issued a standard corporate apology and moved on. Why are you here, taking notes on what some random passenger thinks you should do differently?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "When my wife was diagnosed with cancer," he said finally, "we had to fly frequently for her treatment. Experimental trials in different cities, consultations with specialists across the country. Our daughter was young, confused about why her mother was sick, acting out in ways that made travel difficult." He paused, his jaw working as if the words were physically difficult to produce. "On one flight, our daughter had a complete meltdown. Screaming, crying, inconsolable. My wife was too weak from chemo to help, and I was trying to manage both of them while feeling like I was drowning. A flight attendant, not on my airline, came over, and instead of judging or reprimanding us, she sat down and helped. She entertained our daughter with simple games, brought my wife ginger ale and crackers, gave me 5 minutes to just breathe." Marcus looked directly at Maya. That kindness in that moment meant everything. It was the difference between feeling utterly alone and feeling like humanity still existed. "So when I saw what happened to you yesterday, I saw my family. I saw what could have happened to us if we'd encountered someone like Jennifer instead of that flight attendant who chose compassion." Maya felt tears pressing against her eyes. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "She passed 3 years ago. But the lessons from that time, about how we treat people in their most vulnerable moments, those stayed with me. They're supposed to inform how I run this airline. Yesterday showed me I haven't done enough to ensure that actually happens consistently." Daniel chose that moment to wake fully, his small body tensing before he let out a wail that turned every head in the coffee shop. Maya immediately began the soothing routine, bouncing gently, making soft sounds, checking if he needed changing or feeding or just comfort. Marcus stood. "Do you need anything? Water or?" "I have everything," Maya assured him, even as she felt the familiar anxiety of managing a crying baby in public space. But Daniel's cries only intensified, and she could feel the stares beginning, the judgment that always came when babies were loud in places adults wanted quiet. "Here," Marcus said, pulling out his wallet and handing her a $20 bill. "Get whatever you need from the counter. Take your time. I'll wait." Maya wanted to refuse, but Daniel's cries were reaching that pitch that meant he was truly upset, not just fussy. She gathered her things and headed to the bathroom, leaving Marcus sitting alone at the table. The bathroom was blessedly empty. Maya locked the door and leaned against it, feeling the adrenaline crash that always followed these moments of public crying. Daniel was genuinely upset now, his face red and tear-streaked. She checked his diaper, found it needed changing, and felt a hysterical laugh bubble up at the irony. But this bathroom, unlike the airplane, had space, had a sturdy changing table, had supplies and privacy and the time she needed to attend to her son without fear of condemnation. She changed Daniel efficiently, cleaned him up, and then just held him for a moment against her shoulder, feeling his heartbeat slow as he calmed down. "We're okay," she whispered into his soft hair. "We're going to be okay." When she emerged 10 minutes later, she half expected Marcus to have left, to have decided this meeting was more trouble than it was worth. But he was still there, and he'd been joined by someone else. An older woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun stood next to the table, talking animatedly with Marcus. Patricia, Maya realized with a start. The flight attendant who'd been kind to her after Jennifer's outburst. Patricia turned as Maya approached, her face lighting up with recognition. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad to see you. I've been worried about how you were doing." Maya felt overwhelmed by the unexpected concern. "I'm okay. Better now anyway." Patricia gestured to the table. "Mr. Chin called me this morning and asked if I'd be willing to consult on some training materials he's developing. When he mentioned meeting you here, I asked if I could stop by. I hope that's all right." "Of course," Maya said, settling back in her chair with Daniel, who was calm now, gnawing contentedly on his fist. The three of them talked for another hour. Patricia shared stories from her 22 years as a flight attendant, the evolution she'd witnessed in how airlines treated families, the persistent challenges that came from prioritizing efficiency over humanity. She talked about how flight crews were often stretched too thin, working flights with minimal support staff, expected to serve drinks and snacks and manage passenger conflicts and ensure safety all simultaneously. "It doesn't excuse what Jennifer did," Patricia said firmly, "but it helps explain the culture that can develop when people are constantly stressed and underappreciated. They start seeing passengers as obstacles rather than people they're serving." Marcus took notes on this too, asking questions about crew scheduling, break times, the support systems that existed or didn't exist for flight attendants dealing with difficult situations. Maya watched him work, impressed by how seriously he took every suggestion, how he pushed for specifics rather than accepting vague generalities. Daniel had grown fussy again, hungry this time. Maya apologized and said she needed to feed him, expecting them to politely end the meeting. Instead, Patricia offered to order Maya food while she nursed, and Marcus asked if she'd mind if they kept talking while she fed Daniel, assuring her he'd seen his wife nurse their daughter countless times and wouldn't be uncomfortable if she wasn't. So Maya fed her son right there in the coffee shop while planning airline policy changes with a CEO and a veteran flight attendant, and something about the surreal normalcy of it made her want to laugh and cry simultaneously. By the time they finally wrapped up, Maya had filled her phone with follow-up tasks Marcus wanted her input on. Reviewing proposed policy language, testing new family boarding procedures at Denver's airport, even possibly speaking at a training session for flight crews about the passenger perspective. "I can't promise we'll get everything perfect immediately," Marcus said as they prepare to leave. "But I can promise we'll keep trying. And I can promise that what happened to you will lead to changes that help thousands of other parents." Maya adjusted Daniel in his carrier. "That matters. It really does. I didn't want my humiliation to be for nothing." "It won't be," Patricia assured her, pulling her into an unexpected hug. "You're braver than you know." They walked out together into the bright Colorado afternoon. Marcus and Patricia headed toward a black sedan where a driver waited, while Maya walked to her rental car parked at the far end of the lot. But before they separated completely, Marcus called out, "Maya, wait." She turned back. "Yes." He jogged over, pulling something from his pocket. A business card, but when Maya took it, she saw handwriting on the back. His personal cell number. "If you ever need anything," he said, "or if you see something on one of our flights that concerns you, or even if you just need to talk to someone who understands how hard this parenting thing is, call me." Maya stared at the card, then up at him. "Why are you doing all this?" "Really?" Marcus smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Because 3 years ago, when my wife was dying, a stranger showed us kindness when they didn't have to, and I never got to thank them properly. Maybe this is how I pay that forward. By trying to be the person who shows up when someone needs help. He walked back to his car, leaving Maya standing in the parking lot, Daniel heavy against her chest, a business card in her hand that felt like a promise. The drive back to Jenna's house passed in a blur. Maya's mind was spinning with everything that had happened, everything that might happen as a result of one terrible moment on an airplane. When she pulled into the driveway, Jenna was waiting on the porch, clearly having tracked the meeting's duration and grown concerned. Well, Jenna demanded as soon as Maya emerged from the car. How did it go? Maya unbuckled Daniel from his car seat and gathered him against her shoulder. It went, she said, then laughed at how inadequate that sounded. It was intense and overwhelming, and he's actually going to change things, Jen. Real things. They went inside, and Maya told her sister everything while Jenna made dinner and Daniel played on a blanket on the floor. About Marcus's personal story, about Patricia showing up, about the detailed planning they'd done for systemic changes. About how Maya had gone from feeling invisible to feeling heard in the span of 24 hours. This is going to blow up even more, Jenna said, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. Once word gets out that the CEO personally met with you, took responsibility, made promises, people are going to be watching to see if he follows through. Maya felt a flutter of anxiety at that. What if he doesn't? What if this was just good PR and nothing actually changes? Then you hold him accountable, Jenna said simply. You have his personal number. Use it. Don't let this become another story about corporations making empty promises. Over the following days, Maya watched as Skybridge Airlines began implementing changes with surprising speed. Marcus sent her videos of the new training modules being developed, asked for her feedback on revised family boarding policies, even flew her back to Chicago first class with Daniel a week later so she could consult in person at the airline's headquarters. The experience of flying first class with red carpet treatment felt surreal after the humiliation of that first flight. But more importantly, Maya saw evidence that the changes weren't just cosmetic. Flight attendants were being retrained with scenarios that emphasized flexibility and compassion. Aircraft were being retrofitted with better changing facilities. Gate agents were receiving scripts that framed family boarding as a service enhancement rather than an inconvenience. 3 months after that initial flight, Maya received a call from Marcus. I wanted you to hear this directly from me before the press release goes out. We're launching a family-first initiative across all Skybridge routes. Priority boarding for families with children under 5, dedicated family sections on planes with extra amenities, partnership with pediatricians to develop health and safety guidelines. And we're naming Patricia as the director of the program. That's incredible, Maya said, genuinely moved. Patricia will be amazing at that. There's one more thing, Marcus continued. We'd like you to be part of our family advisory board. Paid position, flexible hours can be done remotely. Your job would be to keep us honest, to make sure we're actually serving families and not just performing service for good publicity. Maya sat down, suddenly dizzy. Are you serious? Completely serious. You have perspective we need. And frankly, after everything you've been through, both with us and as a single parent, you've earned the right to help shape how airlines treat families. She accepted, knowing it would complicate her already chaotic life, but unable to pass up the opportunity to turn her worst travel experience in a lasting positive change. The viral video never completely disappeared from the internet, but its meaning shifted. Instead of being remembered solely as an example of how poorly airlines treated parents, it became known as the catalyst that pushed Skybridge Airlines to revolutionize their approach to family travel. Other airlines, not wanting to be seen as less family-friendly, began implementing similar changes. Jennifer completed her retraining and returned to work, though she requested routes without many family travelers, recognizing her limitations. She sent Maya a handwritten apology 6 months later, and while Maya couldn't say she forgave completely, she appreciated the acknowledgement. Patricia thrived in her new role, bringing warmth and practical wisdom to policy development in ways that made real differences for parents navigating air travel. She called Maya regularly, sometimes for work consultations, sometimes just to check how she and Daniel were managing. And Marcus became an unlikely friend, someone Maya could call when single parenting felt overwhelming, who understood the weight of loving someone while grieving what was lost. They met for coffee whenever Maya was in Denver. Conversations that ranged from airline business to the challenges of raising teenagers to the persistent question of how to live fully while carrying loss. Daniel grew, as babies do, oblivious to how his mother's worst day had transformed into something meaningful. By his first birthday, he was walking and babbling and bringing chaos and joy in equal measure. Maya threw him a small party at Jenna's house in Denver, and among the guests were Patricia and Marcus, who arrived with elaborate gifts and genuine affection for the little boy whose diaper change had sparked a revolution. As Maya watched Daniel smash cake into his face with gleeful abandon, she thought about that moment on the plane when she'd felt so small, so judged, so certain that nobody saw her struggling or cared enough to help. She thought about how close she'd come to letting that experience define her, to retreating from public spaces, to believing the story that mothers like her were burdens rather than people deserving dignity. But someone had seen, someone had cared, and that had made all the difference. Later, after the party had wound down and Daniel was asleep and the adults sat on Jenna's back porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Marcus raised his glass of wine in a toast. To Daniel, he said, and to his remarkable mother, who turned a terrible moment into meaningful change. To people who show up when it matters, Patricia added. To second chances, Jenna contributed. Maya lifted her own glass, thinking about Jennifer and Ryan and all the people who'd failed her in various ways, but also about Marcus and Patricia and Jenna and everyone who'd chosen to help when they didn't have to. To knowing you're not alone, she said quietly. They drank to that as darkness fell completely and the mountains disappeared into shadow, and somewhere above them, planes crossed the night sky carrying passengers toward destinations unknown, some of them families, some of them struggling, all of them deserving to be treated with the dignity Maya had fought for and won, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.